So our next speaker then will be Professor Madawi Al-Rasheed, who is a visiting professor at the Middle East Centre of the London School of Economics. I've got enormously long notes about all of the academic background to Professor Madawi Al-Rasheed, but for the sake of not using up too much time, I'm going to say that she's written several books, including articles in academic journals on the Arabian Peninsula, Arab migration, globalization, gender and religious transnationalism. And she's also a visiting research professor at the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me in this important discussion. There are three issues that I would like to raise. Why this particular war that is launched by Saudi Arabia and why it has taken 7 years. And finally, the third one is what we can do to stop it. On the first point, why this war? First of all, just to put all this in context and say that Saudi Arabia has been interfering in Yemeni politics throughout the 20th century. The first war that took place was in 1934, and their disputed territories that Saudi Arabia annexed and made it part of Saudi Arabia, and the Yemenis had always wanted it back. Other reasons for Saudi interference in Yemen throughout the 20th century and up to this point is that Yemen is the most populous country in the Arabian Peninsula. It's on the southern border of Saudi Arabia. And although Yemen was not fortunate enough to develop its political system to have a real democracy, it did have a strong civil society. It had political parties, it had elections, and yes, it was governed by Ali Abdullah Saleh for several decades and turned it into a dictatorship. But this doesn't change the fact that Saudi Arabia worries about Yemen having the rudimentary institutions of democracy. Yemen has a strong society and a weak state, and this has been the situation throughout the last 100 years. But Saudi Arabia always wanted a weak Yemen, a Yemen that is fragmented and divided, and it has always interfered in the domestic politics of Yemen through sponsoring tribal groups or sponsoring the leadership, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and playing one group against the other, simply because Saudi Arabia is scared of Yemen, although Yemen is the poorest Arab country at the moment. So this is the general sort of point that the Saudis adopt and the general narrative, a weak, fragmented, and divided Yemen. Now, let me just move very quickly to 2015 and why King Salman appointed his son, Mohammed bin Salman, as Crown Prince and also Minister of Defense. Mohammed bin Salman wanted to establish his credentials as an unknown young man and thought that this war on Yemen will be quick, swift, and it will crown him as the desert warrior, like his previous cousin in the 1990s, who claimed that he won the Gulf War when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and Saudi Arabia invited 500,000 Western troops, mainly American troops, to liberate Kuwait. So he wanted to establish his credentials. The second thing that Mohammed bin Salman wanted was to have Yemen as a training ground for a Saudi army and air force that had not actually had the experience of combat. It had accumulated so much weapons and fighter jets and and training that had come primarily from the United States and from Britain, as Britain is the second country that supplies Saudi Arabia. It's the highest, second on the list. So Mohammed bin Salman wanted to see if the amount of weapons that he had accumulated and his predecessors are actually working if they are in the hands of the Saudi army or military forces. So these are the reasons for Mohammed bin Salman to launch this war. There is a third one, and that is the claim to protect the southern borders of Saudi Arabia from Iranian expansion in the Arab world. And they didn't want a Hezbollah type of organization and military group on their southern border. So containing Iran and protecting Saudi Arabia. And the stated objective that we all heard was to return the Yemeni president, which is in the Saudi narrative, is the legitimate leader of Yemen, Hadi, to Sana'a after it was taken by the Houthis. So this is the sort of a combination of stated objectives under UN sanctions and approval by the US and Britain and other countries. But there are also the latent reasons for this war to be launched. So I move to very quickly to my second point about why it has taken 7 years. At the beginning of the war in March 2015, King Salman and his son belittled the Houthis and said that they are a bunch of thugs and they are going to finish them in a quick and swift war. I think most dictators think of war as very quick and they could score a victory and move on. But obviously this hasn't happened. So why hasn't Mohammed bin Salman, with all the weapons and the training that the Saudi defense forces had received from Britain, from the US and other countries, not scored that victory? There are three also reasons why. One of them is Mohammed bin Salman has the war continues simply because Mohammed bin Salman has unchecked power at home. He is not constrained by members of his own family, other royalty, who in the past had dealt with the Yemeni file, such as, for example, deceased Minister of Defense, Prince Sultan. It wasn't the prerogative of the king to deal with Yemen, but there was a sort of division of labor within the Saudi royal family, and the Yemeni file was held by one prince. Now Mohammed bin Salman controls every aspect, every institution of the state, the defense, the economy, the crown prince office, etc. And there are no other royalty that could put a brake on his ambition. So that's one of the domestic reasons. The second one is Saudi Arabia, as you know, is a dictatorship. Society is completely disenfranchised. There are no institutions, no political representation, no elected government, and no civil society. So since 2015, no debate was allowed about this war inside Saudi Arabia, and it was seen as a remote conflict that doesn't affect people's lives in the main urban centers where most Saudis live. But we have seen recently, only like a day ago, that Jeddah, the port on the western side of Saudi Arabia, had been hit by Houthi missiles. So the war had been remote, away from everybody, and in the absence of any kind of grassroots activism and debate about it, it continues without anybody able to contribute to the conversation about it and the futility of this war. In fact, it's a war that is impossible to win. And Mohammed bin Salman, unfortunately, didn't understand that or anticipate that. So that finally, and most importantly, the war enters its 8th year because there are arms supplies that continue to flow into Saudi Arabia. It's an opportunity for Western government, mainly US, Britain, France, and many others, in addition now to recently to missiles and equipment bought from China and other countries. In addition to also mercenaries who are brought to Saudi Arabia to fight this war, mainly from Sudan, from even as far as Central and South America. We know that the UAE has used Colombians in order to fight this war. Saudi Arabia has relied heavily on Senegalese and Sudanese soldiers to fight it. So as long as the international community, and specifically the countries that supply Saudi Arabia with training, directing its fighter jets and its missiles into Yemen, it is not gonna stop. And I'm just going to say just a second about what we could do. I think we, as active citizens, we need to keep the pressure on those governments that supply Saudi Arabia with arms, mainly Britain. If we're talking about Britain, we really need to put up the pressure on Boris Johnson. And as Stephen mentioned, you know, he was the second highest leader to visit Saudi Arabia since the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist, in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. President Macron of France visited Saudi Arabia before the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, and this was followed by Boris Johnson. Up to now, President Biden refuses to sort of give Mohammed bin Salman an audience, shake hands with him, and he is, the relationship has not been great. But Mohammed bin Salman remains defiant, as we see in his various interviews that he's given to Western media. When he was asked about his relationship with President Biden, he said he doesn't understand, and frankly, I don't care. And this crisis, the energy crisis that the whole world is going through, has emboldened him, has empowered him, because he knows that he holds the keys to the oil wells. However, these oil wells are now under threat by missiles, and the fires are burning in the western part of Saudi Arabia. The second, in addition to pressurizing the governments of these countries, what we need to do is also step up the pressure on cultural, art, and sporting activities that had rewarded Mohammed bin Salman by holding events, concerts, and races in the country. So in addition to the political pressure, we need to also reach out to all those cultural and sporting partners, and make them endorse a boycott of Mohammed bin Salman, because simply by going there, holding events, they are saying that we don't care about his human rights records inside the country and his ongoing war in Yemen. Thank you.